Welcome to a special episode of the 2025 Property Report podcast by Property Guru. My name is Tina Ryan, the resident moderator for this series. Today, we explore how urban design is shaping the cities of tomorrow, from smart infrastructure and sustainable communities to visionary master plans that prioritize people, livability, and innovation. Now, this episode unpacks how different parts of Asia are embracing bold ideas to redefine what it means to build a city for the future. Let us now meet the esteemed judges of the Property Guru Asia Property Award Series joining us today. We have the Managing Director for Global Marketing and Communications, the Executive Center and member of the Middle East Judging Panel, Chelsea Elise Perino. We also have with us the Deputy Chief Operating Officer at SJ Architecture Surbana Jurong Consultants Private Limited, a member of our Singapore Judging Panel, Architect Ivy Cole. Also with us, the partner, head of regional estate practice and head of hospitality sector at DFDL Legal and Tax, as well as our Thailand judge, Paul Volodarsky. And finally, our regular commentator for the series, the head of real estate intelligence at PropertyGuru Group, Dr. Nai Jia. To begin, from your regional perspective, what does the city of the future look like, and how is this concept being interpreted or prioritized where you work?
So for me, the city of the future, I think there's quite a few key points to think about. First and foremost would be about adaptability and flexibility, how cities are being designed to adapt to changing needs and technological advancements, infrastructure and urban layouts to be flexible so that it is adaptable. Second point about urban resilience. Today we see cities planning has evolved over time from centralization to decentralization. Especially in Singapore, you will see that we have progressed to take a more decentralized model so that the way the city is being planned is polycentric. You have multiple urban hubs and it redistributes the economic and social fabric. The activities are more spread out. I think this strategy helps to improve accessibility and equity across regions and then also promotes self-sufficiency regionally. And then it also prevents the empty downtown effect that we see in monocentric cities post-COVID and during COVID. And with that evolves new typologies. You start to see more integrated developments, integrated hubs where proximity to transport nodes are being planned together. You see integrated developments we call transit-oriented developments, where we place a lot of priority about mobility and how we integrate mobility with the urban fabric, with social fabric, with urban amenities together to integrate live, work, play all in one hub. Last but not least, I think livability. Today, there's a strong focus about how cities of the future promotes livability and how can we design better with a focus on well-being, not just the physical environment, but also the people, how we design in line with nature, integrating nature, preservation of ecology, but yet designing meaningful spaces for the people in the city.
I'm happy to jump in there. I mean, I agree with everything that Ivy said, but I want to pick up on one of the points that she made, which is about connectivity. I think this idea of connectivity is going to become increasingly more influential and important, and I mean connectivity in two different facets. The first is literal physical connectivity, so the connectivity of the city, where you live to the place where you work, where you work to the places where you need to meet clients if you're a mobile worker, and everything in between, right? So how does the flow of your day work, and how does the city facilitate that to be the most enjoyable, safe, efficient experience that it can do? Because I think COVID helped people to understand the value of understanding where they work best and how they make the most out of their day. But they can only go so far. The infrastructure of the city and the way that the city is planned and all of those different small elements, what kind of F&B is around you, what kind of amenities are there, what does transportation look like, how is traffic managed, what is the pedestrianization of the city look like, all of those things have an impact on how your day flows. And I think that's really important. But connectivity on a personal sense, right? So interpersonal connectivity, I think, is the other big focus. And one of the things that has been a result of COVID that I'm really excited about is this idea of partnerships. I think before we were really good at coming up with new ideas and being innovative, but oftentimes it was in our own silos. And so the end result wasn't as integrated as it could have been, because instead of being planned collectively all together, it was still, a lot of these ideas were being implemented in a conveyor belt sort of methodology. And the key stakeholders that had direct impact on what the end vision was supposed to facilitate were not at the table at the same time in the beginning. And so what we ended up with were really great ideas that kind of fell short a lot of the time because the planning process didn't happen simultaneously, and we didn't have input from all of those key stakeholders in the design phase. One of the things that I'm seeing now, and in the cities that are really moving forward and taking strides and making big differences when it comes to sustainability and livability, are the ones that are saying, okay, government, public and private, corporate, and pedestrians, and the entire community needs to come together and say, first of all, ask the question, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is it that is important to all of these different key stakeholders? And then bring representatives from all of those people to the table in the beginning to discuss and come up with a plan first, and then figure out what the action plan to deliver against all of those is afterwards, as opposed to kind of doing it the other way around. So I think that's a really exciting sort of evolution post-COVID.
Yeah. I mean, I think that these are really important parts of the story of what are we looking at in terms of city development in the future. So we have so many different elements that we now need to factor in post-COVID, because expectations of the people living in urban environments are very different than they were before COVID. And I think one of the things that I look to is how existing buildings are going to be redeveloped and reused and repurposed. Because the way that cities were structured and organized prior to COVID does not necessarily work anymore, simply because you don't have necessarily the same density that you had before COVID. You are seeing people moving further away from city centers because they want more space. The feeling of being trapped in your apartment for a long time has driven people into looking for larger spaces, where I think we saw pre-COVID trends of really small residential units as being kind of the norm, particularly in Southeast Asia, where we saw ever shrinking unit sizes. Now we're starting to see increased unit sizes because of this emphasis on space. And space has more than one. It's personal space, so the space where you actually live, but it's also the space in your office. Whether you're going to utilize your space in the same way, I think it's probably no. Most offices have moved more towards the trend of hot desk scenarios, more collaborative workspaces, and cities of the future are going to need to anticipate that need. I think what we're seeing now in a place like Bangkok is a lot of older office buildings are now struggling to understand what is their place in this new environment. And this is where cities will have to adapt to figure out what are they going to do to attract more people to the urban setting than they did before. Being in the middle of the city before was enough. Now the logistics, and I think Chelsea is exactly right on this, is the logistics of getting someone from point A to point B, whether it's personal work or otherwise, that is the key. That is the thing that needs to be managed. So how do you bring all of the amenities that people expect, whether it's in their work life or personal life, into the city and make it accessible and livable wherever they are? And that means repositioning, changing how we structure the buildings or the use of buildings in the city.
Yeah, maybe I just want to add on a few points from Paul and Ivy and Chelsea. I think I totally agree with what they said. I like what Ivy talked about, what we see in Singapore, the decentralization, the polycentric kind of urban hubs. And we see that in home prices today, where the home prices, like in the suburban areas and the core central regions, the difference is actually becoming narrower. Then you look at Malaysia, right? We see that the home prices, the demand actually are spreading out worse after COVID. People are moving from instead they work in KL, but they go to like neighboring state like Negeri Sembilan because it's they can afford a larger space, it's close to the airport, and there are other amenities. So we see that happening in our space from PropertyGuru. But I think one of the key takeaways from Paul and Chelsea is the logistics about personal space. And that is very true because people are buying bigger homes. And what we are seeing is that in Singapore, at least, the kind of homes being transacted are no longer the smaller unit types, but are the larger unit types at a very high quantum. So the kind of lifestyle, the kind of things that people are looking at is also evolving as we speak. And Ivy rightly pointed out how our infrastructure must adapt to be able to adapt to these changes, especially technological innovations like AI, how it's going to disrupt the whole economy in terms of how we work, how we learn, how we play. And then we also see things like autonomous vehicle that may come on board. How that will change the whole city landscape will be very interesting.
This next question is for Ivy and Chelsea. What design principles or urban strategies are currently shaping real estate in your cities? And are we seeing a genuine shift towards sustainable, smart development?
So the Executive Center is one of the biggest flexible workspace providers in Asia Pacific, and one of the biggest ones in the premium space globally. And we have seen a flight to quality. So as Paul mentioned earlier, the expectations of what a workspace needs to deliver has gone from here to here in a very short period of time, which I think is a good thing, right? Because it means that people are taking a step back and saying, okay, wait a second, what is it that I need in my workspace so that I can do my best work? I mean, I personally believe that most people want to do the best job that they can do. And it's been proven time and again that if you provide people with environments where they feel more happy, where they have better amenities, where they have lots of different choice, and they feel like they have autonomy, they will deliver better work, they will be more productive, they will stay at the organization for a longer period of time, and all of that equals higher revenue for the organization, which is what we all want, right? And so I think from a design perspective, the idea of trying to create a space that has a lot of different kinds of environments where people can choose to work depending on what they do is really valuable. However, one trend that I've seen decline, and I'm not surprised about, is actually this idea of the full hot desk concept, which Paul mentioned a little bit. That's definitely something that's still present, but I think people thought this idea of being fully mobile and being able to, go and jump in and work was really, really great until they realized, oh, wait a second, but then where do I put the picture of my dog and the picture of my kids? And how do I know where my team is when I need to find them because I have a question that really is easier to be answered face to face than if I have to send an email? So I think logistically, again, going back to my point earlier, the end point was really interesting, but the thought process behind it didn't have all of the people in the room that needed to be there to make it work the best way that it could have. So what we're seeing now is a more hybrid, sorry to use that very overused term again, but a hybrid model where, you have sections where people have their own permanent desks, but then you have a lot of different other kinds of environments that are specifically designed to facilitate different kinds of work styles. So you've got big collaborative meeting rooms with, whiteboard walls and lots of technology where people can do brainstorming or have virtual meetings. Then you have, call rooms that are one person that are soundproof where people can go if they need to do a one-on-one call. You've got areas that are designated as quiet, heads down areas where if people are sitting there, they're doing something where they need to be in the flow, so don't bother them at that moment. And that kind of transition into a more aware workspace is, I think, what the future is really going to look like, and people are trying to design towards that. I mean, it used to be called activity-based working, but I think we've even moved beyond that concept because and are moving more towards a personalized workspace experience where I choose what works best for me and Paul and Ivy choose what works best for them, even though we're all working within the same environment. And that's really exciting.
So just building on the earlier conversation about polycentric cities. So I think with that, it drives a new typology in terms of building programming. We start to see the rise of integrated developments where the programming is quite, I would say, quite multifaceted. You start to bring not just live, work, play, but what it essentially means is not just bringing your office there, but also a lot of social community developments housed within one development, one integrated development. So you can be there in the morning to do your grocery, then you can get on a conference call in a workplace within the same place, and you can meet with your friends and other communities. There's even sports facilities within the same development, and even retail and shopping and so on and so forth. So that kind of unique hybrid and mixed development, mixed use typology has evolved from just retail, hotel, retail, commercial, commercial, residential to kind of a multifaceted, integrating not just workers but also communities, from young to old as well. It's quite inclusive, so it spans across a large range of age groups and different communities all coming into one place. I think that's fairly interesting, and we start to see a lot of such developments coming out in Singapore, and this really create a huge vibrant hub for that precinct and for that district, which kind of attracts people to move away from the central business downtown. We used to go to the CBD to do business, to work, and then you go to other places to run other errands and other to go to other amenities and facilities. But today, you just need to go to one place and you can basically spend your 9 to 5 within the same place. And you can meet with different groups of people, be socially connected at the same time. That's one point about it. The other trend that I see is because there's a lot of talk about sustainability these days and how we achieve real sustainability especially in a growing and aging city. Singapore is not old, but we are 60 years old today, and we start to see the rise of how can we rethink adaptive reuse in some of our older buildings. Instead of pulling it down and rebuild, this is a time for the nation to start thinking, and for architects like us to be more creative about adaptive reuse of the existing building. And then at the same time, when we are designing for new buildings, how can we design such that it's adaptive for future proofing? I think that's really driving rethinking about sustainability thinking and development. And I think that's how we can reinterpret developments, how can we plan infrastructure within the same build structure, but yet adaptive at the same time in terms of programming and future needs and future use as the city evolves. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. And one more thing that I would also add to that is with this idea of mixed use, what's really exciting to see is that a lot of the developers it's this concept of partnership, right? And it's also about giving back to the external community. So I think before, a lot of the time the design focus was, okay, who are my tenants going to be? Even if it was a mixed use development, right? It was like, okay, these are the corporate tenants that we think will be here. Here are the retail tenants that are going to be here. Here's F&B. All right, what are those people within that small audience pool? What is it that they want that's going to keep them there and that they're going to use and that's going to make their experience better? That's all very important, but that's a tiny, tiny speck of a population of a city or the people that are in one development, right? So I think now the really evolved conversations are expanding way beyond that. And they're saying, okay, what can we also do to give back to the larger population that are going to be living surrounding this development or that are going to be passing through this development? what can we give back to them as well? How can we include them, as Avi said, into this experience so that it becomes something that adds to the value of the ecosystem of the city, as opposed to just being like its own little microcosm. Dubai is doing a lot of this. Singapore is doing a lot of it as well. And Hong Kong is on its way, but I think it has a lot to learn still. But I think that's also a really exciting evolution, because now, you're moving beyond just the hardcore infrastructure and the people and the ecosystem that's within that development. And you're saying, okay, how are we going to use this to push the economy and the health of the city forward?
Thank you, ladies. This is for Paul and Dr. Nai Jia. As cities evolve, what are the most pressing challenges you see with policy or public buy-in or infrastructure limitations when it comes to implementing future-ready designs?
This is a complicated question. I think from a public policy perspective, and granted, I'm coming at it from a more legal side, and I'm seeing it in multiple jurisdictions where I see different issues coming up. But overall, what I see is there is a lot of growth, particularly in the developing markets that I'm in. And you're starting to see master planning. So you have master planning basically being done by the government to kind of assess where they want certain types of projects to be located. But the speed at which those policy decisions are made, by the time they're implemented, the needs have changed. So because we're growing so fast, and because the city is changing so fast, and because growth is oftentimes organic in cities, you don't necessarily know which neighborhood will be popular and for what reason until it happens. So understanding that there is always going to be some disconnect between the public policy element of master plan design for the city and where the city is going to be the big challenge that I see, particularly in cities which are newly developed, which is, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's in new areas of Singapore, whether it's in the developing markets of Southeast Asia, all of that is happening very, very fast. You're seeing a change in each of these cities very quickly as the population changes, as the types of jobs which are being done are changing. And the government needs to be much more attuned to what is happening on the ground while they're making those policy decisions to see where the needs will actually need to be met. So if that's going to be, for instance, I think one of the big challenges is providing green space. So Singapore probably doesn't have as much of a problem with providing green space, but places like Bangkok, like Ho Chi Minh City, green space is a big issue in making places more livable. And that also has to be factored into the changing environment. So we're experiencing hotter weather, we're experiencing more storms. There needs to be more green space to kind of handle this changing environment. And when public policy decisions around this are being made, you have to basically be talking to all of your stakeholders. And I think both Ivy and Chelsea mentioned this, is that you need to integrate the communities that you're trying to develop and make sure that they understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish, why it's beneficial for the community, and making sure that they're given a voice in that discussion so that those decisions are not being made in a vacuum. And I see that across the region, particularly in developing markets, where decisions are being made without necessarily consulting the people that ultimately reside in these spaces. So for me, it's just going to be connecting public policy more closely with, discussions with the community, which I don't see. I think it's very integrated in other jurisdictions, but I don't see it as integrated in developing markets at the moment.
I totally agree with Paul, and I wanted to add on to his point. In a lot of public policy, I think in today's context, right, the biggest concern is really the polarization of societies, which creates a lot of tension. And that's why you see, like in some of the countries we are looking at, their systems have to change to become more nimble and agile. We see Vietnam doing quite a lot of changes to their government to streamline a lot of process. Malaysia also did that. They also streamline their process, make it digitize. A lot of the approval process. And of course, Singapore is leading the pack. So I think that efficiency and nimbleness is required to be really attuned to the ground and to execute. And I think I think Paul really pointed out the question, right? Whether they could execute the final plan. I mean, when we look at like for instance Vietnam, the railway station, how long it takes for it to complete, that takes a lot of years and a lot of investment. Whereas you look at Singapore, at the other spectrum where they are very focused, right? They are able to complete the infrastructure. There's great faith that the government will come out with that particular plans. So there's the trust that the government agencies to build with the people is something that is a very pressing issue, and especially in today's society where it's very polarized, where views can become very polarized in a very rapid pace. So I think, how do we make the communities into one inclusive, aligned decision-making metrics? I think that is very key. And like the way Paul was talking about stakeholder management becomes even more important today to ensure that sustainability, green spaces are aligned. Because while on one hand, green spaces, we should have more green spaces, but on the profit and loss, statements, it may not show up, while in fact, having more green spaces means less sellable area to some. So how do they create that balance? And in truth is that over time, we see that people are willing to pay a premium for, areas that are facing green parks, etc. So there's actually an economic value to it. So I really think it's a bit of awareness, a bit of education, but governments, the most pressing matter to governments is really stakeholder management.
If I may ask all four judges to please answer this next question briefly, have you seen any project, local or international, that truly captures the spirit of the city of the future? And what lessons can your market take from it?
Well, in SJ, where I'm from, so we are working on a quite rather interesting industrial development project with the government, which is JTC. I would say it's a paradigm shift for industrial cities planning. They used to call it the Industrial 4.0 plan. So it's a very ambitious project at this place called the Jurong Innovation District, or JID in short. So it's industrial estate planning where the typical industrial estate is where it's just really manufacturing, very hardcore, and just pure industrial. It's not a place where the community will be there. In fact, you will not be there if you have no business or you do not work in the industrial estates. But in this JID, in Jurong Innovation District, it flips this narrative where we want to transform and create spaces that were originally unwelcoming into a new public hub where people come to this place, is bridging community and industry together. And in fact, community can also learn about industrial 4.0, what does it mean? And it's not, and because it also helps to activate those spaces where on a weekend there is no industrial activity, these spaces become usable by the community. And so how it does is that it's actually a position between Baha, Clean Tech and Tengah Estate, and it's bridging these three estates together to create where in the heart of it is a square, we call it the Bulim Square, and it's actually an elevated plaza that becomes a pedestrianized space connecting with multiple mobility that's across the entire estate, and becomes a community and social space and connecting to the different residential estates into the industrial estates, and with mobility connectors like cycling paths and F&B and retail activating the entire area. So this is, and also integrating with greenery design, landscaping, and so on and so on. So becomes a public and social space. And what happens to all the, because in industrial estates, there's always a lot of heavy vehiculars, you have 40-footers, containers, and so on. These are all taken underground, a deep underground. So we free up the land, we free up the space for people, and traffic disappears. So I think that's quite a transformative change for industrial estate planning. So it will be completing soon, and we would see the fruition of this new planning. And of course, with that, there's a lot of integration with IoT, with smart district planning facilities. Even talking about in future is designing for autonomous vehicle delivery, or even for vehicle to transport people across the estates. So these are really future-proofing and thinking beyond today. And we hope to see a transformed industrial estate becoming not just industrial, but also a community space, bridging all walks of life. Yeah.
That's very cool. Hong Kong is doing something similar with the suburban roadways, I guess, in West Kowloon Cultural District. That's in their planning as well. And I think that's such an interesting and smart use of space, especially in places where space is in small supply. I think there are two projects that stand out. The first one is in Dubai. It's liveable, which is one of the newest buildings that just opened. And they really put a lot of thought into what I was talking about before in terms of, how can the mezzanine level, where there's a lot of connectivity and a lot of pass through as people are moving from one district or one, transport hub to the other, but don't necessarily have anything or any real purpose to be in that building other than just walking through it. How can they activate and make that space something that feels welcoming? And so they put a lot of thought into a mezzanine plaza area that can be activated for tons of different kinds of community events that are open to everyone, including building tenants. There's lots of really cool F&B, and they're just in the beginning of development, so there's a lot of more phases that are sort of underway. And I thought that was a really interesting, beautiful development for the city skyline, of course, all ultra grade A and very sustainable in the way it was designed. So that's one that I think is really interesting. And the other one is actually in Singapore, and that's Singapore Land Tower. And the reason I think that is such an interesting project is because the natural inclination for a lot of developers when they want to upgrade an old asset is to just tear it down and build a new one, because it's a lot easier actually to design a grade A, LEED gold, totally sustainable building if you just build it from the ground up, as opposed to having to go back and try and retrofit and upgrade so that it matches the current day standards. But they decided to do that. So instead of tearing that building down, they have spent the last couple of years going through a complete upgrade process with their tenants still inside the building, by the way. And it was really interesting to understand why they decided to do that. Obviously, it had a lot to do with upgrading so that the building was sustainable, but also thinking about all the waste that comes from tearing a building down. And so I thought that was a really inspirational sort of approach, and also sort of a flagship proof of concept that you can actually do it, if you take the time, and the outcome is a lot better for the environment and for the community, and ends up paying off in the end. So those are two that I think are really stand out.
For me, I guess I would say, it's a hard thing at the moment in a lot of our jurisdictions, because there's part of me that is all about preservation of existing landmark style buildings and making sure that developments are meeting needs. So one of the ones that stands out to me in Thailand actually is the planned project, and we'll see what it ultimately looks like. But it's the planned redevelopment of the Chinatown area in Bangkok. I think that what they've done, at least in the concept designs, is quite amazing for a place like Thailand, where they have really worked and thought about how to design the space so that it becomes a destination, but also doesn't push out a huge amount of the community. And they did really work with the community to keep certain areas around the site still owned by the original owners, and allowing them to participate in the benefits of that redevelopment of the project. So there are going to be large scale developments there, so larger buildings, but all of them looking at doing it in a way which preserves the cultural heritage of the district, doing it in a way which also discussed with the community how that would ultimately look, and then making sure that the community that was there was also able to remain and benefit from that redevelopment. So for me, that is a big one for me in terms of sustainability, it's not just sustainability in terms of construction design, but it's sustainability of community and sustainability with respect to the cultural heritage of the architecture in that area. That's one of the things that used to drive me crazy in Vietnam is you would see these beautiful buildings being torn down and replaced with a box with windows. So I do like that they really thought about how to integrate a new development in a historic district.
I love that project. That one's so cool.
So for me, right, I think that there are really a lot of projects, really worth mentioning. But I would say that one of the more recent one is when I was in Malaysia. So it's actually Desa Park City. It's very interesting. So this used to be a barren granite quarry, and then it was being redeveloped. Of course, there's a lot of, when it was redeveloped, people were like, oh, this is just a very empty site. This won't worth any money. But how they think about it is try to make it very accessible, make it into a community development, very human-centric, and then add on with the sustainable innovations. So people actually pay a premium, and we do see that, even the resale price, even when people are viewing it, the development, they still see a lot of activity, search activity for this particular township. So I think when we think about sustainable design, we always associate with higher costs, associate with things that are like more for vanity checks. Some people don't even find it important, but actually it is, because it's one of future proving, but it also adds to the value of the project at the current state. So it really makes me think about, in the past, how do we combine the sustainability components with the commercial components, which used to be a bit further apart, but I think it has come closer together. And of course, to some of the more forward-looking developers, of course, this kind of things have become more intertwined in a way that people are viewing sustainability more like a long-term investments. So that is probably the one for me at the current state.
Finally, judges, in one sentence, what must be prioritized today to ensure our cities become more livable and resilient over the next decade? Who would like to go first? In one sentence.
Ask good questions to multiple stakeholders, not just the ones that you think of off the top of your head.
The future to be co-created with not just yourself, your clients, and all your stakeholders and the communities.
Make sure you're doing traffic studies to bring your people in and out.
Yeah, I was thinking whether I should be the first one or the last one. The last one tends to be hardest. But yeah, for me, it's really to create an inclusive society, because I think in today's world, really, how do you include different groups of people? And we are not only talking about the aged, we are talking about those people that are more neurodivergent, people who are very different. How do we bring everyone together from different religious, political backgrounds together? They may disagree on certain issues, but how do we get them to live together and be aligned, at least, through a basic kind of things about improving the well-being of everyone? So that's not a very short sentence, but yeah.
Thank you all for your thoughtful insights and for being part of today's discussion. It is exciting to see how urban design is evolving across the region. To our listeners, thanks for joining us. For more updates and insights, visit asiapropertyawards.com. Once again, that's asiapropertyawards.com. See you in the next episode.